Greetings again. We are going to talk about an online future, and you see the panelists who I'm looking forward to learning from. Let's see, Gregor Kennedy, Pro Vice-Chancellor for Teaching and Learning, University of Melbourne, will speak first, if I got that right.
Yep.
And Maria Spies from Navitas, a provider that supports institutions, going to speak second. And Belinda, Tynan, Deputy Vice-Chancellor for Education at RMIT, third. So by way of introduction, I'd like to have you visualize a New Yorker cartoon of, in this case, a man, it could be a woman, coming back from lunch, and his assistant says, "Sir, while you were out, the following paradigm shifts occurred." Online education is seen as a game changer. And as you heard yesterday, Peter Drucker, some 20 plus years ago, said it will destroy at least American, if not global, higher education. That hasn't happened. Clay Christensen recently said, The Innovator's Dilemma, that over half of the universities will be out of existence within the next decade. That isn't going to happen. So what I'd like to say is, but online education, in my experience, is a profound game changer. The faculty that I know that have worked with it, and I should say in the American context, we as an accreditor needed to approve all new online programs. So we got, it became quite a laborious process, one area for deregulation, if you will. But we got to see where there were faults and where there were promises with online education. So just with a little introduction, let me just say in the US there are over 3 million online students, but there are from the ground up online universities, American Public University, American Military University, Ashford, others that have upwards to 100,000+ students. And they're only online, and so they're designed in a different way than a brick and mortar institution, expanding into online courses where the majority of students are involved, at least in the US, rather than full degree programs. And one other thing I will just say is that edX and Coursera have no business model yet except to offer joint degree programs. So I just want to say, when Georgia Tech has, with Udacity, a master's in computer science, I believe it's 10 courses, they offered on the last course an AI bot to respond to all interactions with students. And which course do you think was students rated as the best, the most responsive to student concerns? The last one, the one with the bot that was trained. So the promise of the future is quite extraordinary. What I would say, and I hope you all will address because I want to learn, you all have a lot of experience with online education, is attrition seems to be higher in online programs in the US. There are technology and bandwidth issues. Many institutions rely almost heavily, if not exclusively, not just for-profit institutions offering online, on contingent faculty, adjunct faculty, where the size of the online cohorts can be overly excessive, raising questions about quality. And security and fraud are federal issues, and it's a very big issue, and there was a Government Accountability Office study where some institutions were found to be very lax with respect to both. On the other hand, I will say that the exciting thing is that learning design teams seem to work with faculty, and it brings a whole new approach, and that most faculty I know have worked in the online venue. Actually, they find it's more work, but they can build true community in an online environment. So with that, I would say I think the promise is great. I'm looking forward to learning. I particularly want to learn about blockchain. I think, who's speaking on blockchain? Gregor?
Maria.
Maria. I want to learn because I'm told this is going to be a real game changer. and I'd like to understand it. How many of you know about blockchain and how it's used? Well, you all are ahead of me, which is very easy to do. But so let me turn it over to Gregor, and I'm very looking forward to the panel's comments and your questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ralph. So the title of the session starts with the word quality, quality, success and an online future. And so I immediately thought about the concept of the iron triangle, which some of you I hope would know, which features quality on one side or one apex of the triangle. Quality is in there. The iron triangle was first coined in the US in 1969 in discussions really about project management, and then it turned to health. And it's referred to as a triple constraint, and the three vertices of the triangle refer to quality, to access, and to cost. And there's this interdependent relationship between these three, and it means that you can't change one side of the triangle without affecting the others. If you reduce the cost and increase access, then it's likely to impact on your quality. If you increase quality and access, then be prepared to increase your costs. So the concept of the iron triangle was first applied to higher education in the States in a 2008 report for the Centre for Public Policy and Higher Education. And the authors of the report contend, and I quote here, that most of the presidents believe that if one wants to improve the quality of higher education, one must either put money in the system or be prepared to see higher education become less accessible to students. Conversely, cutting the costs in higher education must eventually lead to cuts in either quality or access. Now, of course, this view is not universally, and some would argue, and particularly in government, that one aspect of the iron triangle cost could go down and you could maintain quality and access. And I reckon the jury is still a bit out on that one. But with online learning, the application of the iron triangle and was most notably aptly provided by Sir John Daniel. So the question is, how do we maintain quality while simultaneously reducing cost of both production and delivery, and at the same time increase our access for our students? And this, of course, is really tricky. At the University of Melbourne, my colleague David Israel uses the metaphor for our graduate online team, which is the team responsible for developing our online courses. He refers us to the team as one as being involved in jet engine industrial model of production, a highly engineered, highly quality assured process. It's remarkably efficient. The production creates internationally recognised jet engines of high quality, and these are used worldwide. While there's a significant upfront cost, and there's of course ongoing costs associated with supporting production, Graduate Online Melbourne is in a way doing something similar in terms of producing high quality online learning that is accessible to students around the world. The production model is scalable, the student access is scalable to a point. We're not looking for MOOC-like numbers in our graduate courses, and when I say MOOC-like numbers, I mean MOOC-like numbers of today, not MOOC-like numbers of 2012. And the delivery costs are the same, or in some instances, due to scale, they can be less. But my point is at the heart of this process is quality. We know a bit about what quality online learning looks like, and my colleagues here will talk about this. It's led by strong curriculum and learning design. It's not about putting up PowerPoint slides on the web. It's typically not about crank-the-handle approaches to MOOC production. It's not an online, connected, self-directed, peer-based learning groups finding some sort of learning path in the wilderness without an expert guide, that is, a teacher. And we've known this about learning design and curriculum design for some time. I started in this caper in about 1998, and we knew it then. So for me, negotiating quality, success and an online future, there's really only two thoughts. Negotiating quality is about wrestling or maybe ironing out the iron triangle. And we know a lot about what success looks like in online learning, and strong curriculum and learning design lies at the heart of that success. So that's it for me.
Great. Over to me. Thanks, Gregor. Hi everyone. Yeah, I'm going to take a sort of slightly different perspective on our discussion today. In addition to running learning and teaching services at Navitas, I also run the Digital Learning Futures portfolio for Navitas Ventures. Navitas, like many universities, has been around for a little while, maybe not as long as many of you. We're big, we're anchored in bricks and mortar, we feel things are changing around us and we're doing some innovative things, but we really need to move faster. So we opened a venturing arm to try to map and understand what was going on outside our own backyard, outside our own organisation. The three things I want to talk about today in relation to online education are investment. Where is the money coming from? And there's plenty of it. The technologies that are driving some of these innovations, and also starting a discussion about the impact of these two things on current models. Quality, success, and an online future, and the sort of topic of the whole conference is students. Who are the students now? Who will be the students in the future, and what are they looking for? What is success, actually? Who's measuring that? Whose success? Our success or the student's success? Who defines quality? I'm cognizant that I'm at a TEXA conference, but who is defining quality out there? And what is online? There are many different versions of online, and I think it's a bit, I don't agree with saying online is good or online is bad and on campus is good. There's many different versions of both, and so I think we really need to unpack that a little more. Firstly, just on the investment side. Globally, there is a growing interest in investing in education technology, in education innovation. This year alone, we expect a $3 billion investment into education, innovation and technology. And this is in the context of constrained public funding for education. But there is a lot of money going into education, and it's going in from venture capitalists and technology companies. And that is slightly scary. What are they investing in? What are those trends? We're seeing, the US in terms of that VC funds have discovered education as a vertical, and they are pumping lots and lots of money into it. They are mostly still, the US is the dominant investor, but we're seeing huge growth in Chinese and Indian investment firms. I spent the last week in China and it is amazing, fast and a bit scary. Education to work, that is where a lot of money is going. The boundaries between learning and work, and that involves all those 21st century skills areas, collapsing and morphing. There's very porous boundaries there. Alternative models for job experience, placement, internships, lots and lots of models, lots of investment going into trying to crack that scale issue with job work placement and internship models. Typically online, these starting from scratch online and absolutely built for scale, don't care about geography. So definitely growing fast in terms of investment and innovation. The credentialing space is very interesting. There's been alternative credentialing around for quite a long time, lots of startups in that area. Lots of universities right here today are investing and experimenting in alternative credentials. Also lots of investment going into alternative models. So university model, higher education model, the traditional sort of model for education, but students are changing, their needs are changing, and people are investing into alternative models. MOOCs is a very good example. MOOCs 1.0, 2.0, and we're seeing lots of changes there. As you said, with the business models are difficult, but they're finding them. They will find a business model. And much of that is to do with partnering with existing providers, actually, like yourselves. The technologies that are driving investment and innovation, artificial intelligence is the new technology that is going to disrupt everything, apparently. The Georgia Tech example that you talked about, Ralph, is a good one. We're seeing a lot of AI applications into universities and into education to solve sort of low-level scale issues. And it might be answering questions, find me a course, the website's too difficult, I just want to enrol into something, all that sort of stuff. But we are seeing also investment now and innovation in AI trying to solve more complex learning problems. So AI is making its way into the classroom. That's interesting. There's a couple of examples where AI-driven technologies are supporting the assessment of critical thinking skills based on analysis of discussion boards. You know, we'll see. Lots of experimentation in that, but lots of possibilities as well. The other technology, of course, blockchain technology. So blockchain as a way of an alternative way to record one's own credential or one's own learning that is immutable across time. It puts the ownership in the hands of the learner. So again, lots of sort of innovations in that space. Early days, I know Melbourne Uni are doing something, and others as well as us, experimenting in this area. But actually, the technology is still fairly basic. I think we're still going to be seeing 5 years' time, perhaps, some more sort of innovations in that space where we can really make use of that in education. The other, you know, the big question though is, with all this money flowing in and these technology advancements, what are the potential opportunities and potential challenges for the existing sector? I think there's plenty. I look forward to talking about those during the discussion.
With all that excitement going on and so much sort of surrounding us, we might then go to the question of, well, do we actually need a different quality assurance framework for online learning? What would be different about it if we did have something like that? Have we already had the argument that learning's just learning? What is our seeming problem here that would see us needing to discuss this? Why have this debate? We must be concerned, otherwise we wouldn't be having this debate and it wouldn't be on this agenda here today. But in other jurisdictions, online, as we see in the US, every time you want to put a program up, you have to actually get it approved by somebody. You only have to go next door to our neighbours. You only have to go to Singapore or to Hong Kong, to Vietnam, to feel exactly the same level of regulation. You don't have control of that. You have to actually work within the government giving you approval for running an online program. But that argument is not dead around the world. In fact, globally, Australia is in a very unusual position in some ways, in that our distance education has been largely regulated and quality assured through a single system. And we've had some pretty heavy hitters in the space in our history. In fact, Australia is one of the oldest countries in the world to be offering distance education since the 1880s, the Pitman's correspondence courses. And then our heavy hitters, such as University of New England, Charles Sturt University, USQ, Deakin University, University of Queensland, and then all the rest of us now that have sort of, you know, joined that space as well. We've got a very long history. We kind of understand what we might be doing in that space in some ways. And, you know, who isn't doing online? I bet there's no one in this room, no institution that isn't doing some form of what online looks like, whether it is in a blended mode or whether it's in a fully online capacity. Even in my own organisation, we've just started a subsidiary. It's called RMIT Online, where we are delivering fully online courses. And I know that there are many other universities here who are doing exactly the same. We're not particularly suspicious of it, which is why I think it's interesting that we're starting to sort of pull it out into the debate again. And the public isn't really very suspicious of it either. Well, not here in Australia. We haven't had the Phoenix debacle. We do know, though, as my other colleagues have mentioned, that the quality is variable, particularly as how just technologies have disrupted us. And we've found we have not really been able to respond to that. We still seem to take what we have as a classroom-based experience or a campus-based experience and largely convert that into an online space. So what might we be worried about? Well, I started to do a list of all the things that we'd be worried about. And I thought, rather than do that, I might tell you a really awful story, a doom and gloom story. I could have told you a positive one. If you'd like to read a positive one, you can read a futures piece, which I wrote, called Miranda and the Brave New World. But I'm going to give you one which is not highly refined yet, but it's a story of a student, and I'm going to call her Miranda, so it's the opposite to the Brave New World. So hi, my name's Miranda, and I've been wanting to pursue a new career. I want to be an entrepreneur. I've sort of been working in the bank for a long time, and I just sort of think I could do it myself. I'm pretty busy though. You know, I've got a few kids, husband, the whole bit going on. We're paying off the mortgage. I'm thinking about sending my kids to private school. I just, I've got to be a bit careful how much I spend at this point in time. And I'm sort of asking a question, do I need a qualification? So I started out doing some MOOCs. They were sort of interesting, actually, because you just go online, it's all free, jump in there, you can sort of pick whatever you want. And I picked a few things that were interesting for me, and I could dip in and out of it. That was quite good. As I was doing that, I sort of caught on to this one group, though, where if I did their MOOCs, I could actually get some credit. Well, that's what it kind of looked like. I could get some credit and go in and do a course. And I really felt that that would give me a feel for what online learning was going to be like. But while I thought I knew what online learning was going to be like because I'd had that experience, when I spoke to the people about joining the real course, as I was told it was a real course, that it was only going to be a few hours a week. Well, in fact, the reality was that it was actually 15 to 20 hours a week. The course wasn't particularly very interesting that I ended up landing in. I didn't really get to meet any other students per se. The discussions really didn't work, and where they did, we had sort of other students sort of going berserk over the discussion board, nobody sort of moderating it. Who knows what was truth on there? I didn't know, and I didn't know if my peers were telling me the right thing or the wrong thing. There was no one there really guiding us. Our teacher was never there, and I think our teacher was actually part-time. And I think they were only there 2 days a week, but I couldn't really figure that out, and they didn't really tell us anyway when we could contact them or how to contact them. I would ask questions, but I'd never really get a response. And when I got my assessments, which were always late anyway, they didn't actually feed into the next assessment, so I didn't really know what I was doing. I couldn't source the readings, as the library didn't really have them all as digital resources fully and properly. So when I contacted the library, they actually scanned them and then sent them to me in an email. And I thought, well, that's okay, but but I had to actually pay for that as well. I couldn't believe that, because I thought, well, what am I actually paying for if I actually have to pay for that as well? My assignments seemed pretty irrelevant. Here I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I was so excited about that. But actually, I ended up having to go to this exam centre, and I did all these multiple choice questions. It was really stressful. It was about 100 kilometres away from where I actually lived, and I had to pay for that as well. It wasn't what they said it would be at all. I felt a little bit like an afterthought. Oh yeah, and they also changed the same as a campus student. I just don't get that. And then I started thinking, well, maybe this uni shouldn't actually be doing online stuff, as they didn't seem to know, what it was really all about or what they were doing. And I certainly wouldn't be rating online learning for anyone. I'm totally disappointed. I was on my own. It was just a book on loan. My teacher was nowhere, and I don't think I really felt that I was actually learning anything. But I kept going because I paid for it, and I'm one of those kind of people that, you start a book, you finish it. Oh, and I forgot to say that my qualifications all went on to this fancy new thing called the blockchain. But that got hacked. And as it turns out, there's another Miranda somewhere else on the other side of the world that's using my qualifications to get jobs as well. And apparently that's in something called the dark web. Fantastic. Did I get a new job? Did I sort of make my own career? Did I sort of, create that business I wanted to do? No, I haven't, because I don't really feel confident that what actually I've been taught is actually going to help me. And it certainly, didn't help me, in terms of where I'd like to see myself go. So there my nightmare ends. So if I was to go back and say, well, if we unpacked all that, which I'm not going to do, and say, well, what's the value chain? And that's a pretty dismal story, and we can all see parts of ourselves in that. There are equally positive stories, I might add, about how we do online really well in this country. But when we look at that value chain and all the steps that go through it, they may be the sorts of things that we're worried about in online learning. Over to you, Val.
Thank you.
Grim.
We have some time and a lot of good questions. What do the separate entities universities are setting up to deliver online mean for governance and quality? Who wants to take that?
That could be a question for me.
That might be an
I think so.
Yeah. Well, I know from our experience, the way we have set up our subsidiary is that all the quality processes that are of the university itself still exist, because the entity itself cannot award programs, the university does. And so in every aspect of the approval of programs and courses and the evaluation of them, they go through the standard organisational processes themselves. And then in itself, in the organisation of RMIT Online, we've also layered in other safeguards in terms of what we do for the quality and assurance of that.
Anyone else?
Melbourne University hasn't gone that direction. I think that Belinda's answered it well.
We did a survey recently of international vice-chancellors of our partner universities internationally, and 2/3 of them are digitising their current operations in terms of the student experience and building separate business models. It's very common to extract the new thing and keep it separate for a little while to perhaps make it go faster, and so it's quite common.
Yeah. I suppose the only other thing that I'd say is that it speaks to the question of disaggregation. And one of the things that you see when institutions, universities start to have third-party providers or set up separate wholly owned businesses of the university, that there is a sense that the disaggregation of teaching, learning and assessment, where traditionally we see teaching, learning and assessment as inexorably combined, when you do set up these other parties, there's a sense that there's maybe a disaggregation between teaching and learning and assessment. So the quality assurance mechanisms and standards that you have in place are incredibly important. But from an academic culture point of view, I think it does send some signals about potential disaggregation and what the role of academics and teaching staff in teaching and learning, and whether or not we're seeing that separated a little bit. The research-teaching nexus, whether you believe it exists or not, that's another tension there in that conversation.
I think, can I make one comment just about what Belinda said in terms of that awful story and assigning blame to a mode of delivery rather than just really poor design. You know, I think that's a really good example of very poor design, but I wouldn't blame the mode of delivery for it. And I think that's what we tend to do.
Well, I think it's an easy thing to pick on.
Right.
You know, and so I think if we go to the heart of what is the magic for online and distance education, what has been at the heart of that, you would say that, you know, a great online or a great learning design, and that's true of the ordinary curriculum, a great learning design will potentially produce great learning outcomes as a consequence of that. The other thing I said is that we quite often adopt something and do the same things with it that we've done before.
Right.
And perhaps our consideration in that space needs to be more than that. So when you buy a new phone, for example, you expect it to do exactly what the old phone did. And it usually takes a while for you to understand what the new functionality is and what it is. It's the same with a new car. You know, you get in and, oh, the window wipers are on this side instead of this side this time, and there's all this confusion. I think it's the same when, you know, these new technologies come at us at such a pace. It's easier for us to look at them and say, well, what can they do? In fact, I think there's a question around that. You know, what can online education not do now? It's potentially a question that limits our thinking about what it can be if we were to look at it through that lens of learning design and its potentiality, rather than sort of saying, well, it can't do what I want to do now. It's sort of limiting what we think could be, you know, enhanced learning outcomes.
That's exactly right. I mean, I think that that's the heart of the learning design, curriculum design question. And we often set up this false dichotomy between face-to-face online, which is not particularly helpful. People in the ed tech sector, people who do research in ed tech have sort of poo-pooed that for a long period of time. And it's always useful to think about them just being as different modalities, which there's different affordances depending on the modality that you're operating in. And great human-computer interaction research from a long time ago with IBM, sort of looking at the affordances of different types of mode of delivery, where we see face-to-face as some sort of gold standard, quite reasonably so. You know, I'm a failed social psychologist, I understand and get the idea of human interaction. But at the same time, when you do mediate things by different technologies, there are some things that might be actually better than the supposed gold standard of face-to-face. The most obvious one being, you know, non-synchronous communication allows time to review things. The fact that you have an asynchronous communications means that you can review and also hold back on some communication that you might not do in a face-to-face context. Just an example of just questioning the idea of the gold standard of face-to-face versus online.
I'll just say there is a question, what can online education not do now nor ever do? And I'll say in our experience, there was a view that some science courses, lab courses could not be done. But now surgery is being conducted. I just read about surgery, somebody in Europe doing surgery in New York online. And it's extraordinary to think about that. As a lawyer, I think of all the possible malpractice claims. But the same way about learning design for cadavers and working in the health sciences and the like, that some would argue are even better than traditional. And that relates to, there was a question here, let me pick up on, because I want to add to this question. Do you think students perceive online degrees with lower quality due to no face-to-face time? And if so, how do you get around this? And in the US, faculty surveys, faculty, particularly in certain disciplines that don't have as much experience, tend to view with suspicion online. I don't know if you have that here, particularly in the humanities and the like. But so I would say the question, is there a perception that online is lower quality, and how are you addressing that?
I'd probably have a go at that first of all, because I fundamentally don't believe that in Australia in particular, because this is different in different countries you go to, that there is an issue here. When you look at the hundreds of thousands of graduates that have come out of our universities already through online or distance education modalities, you know, USQ, UNE, CSU, very high employability rates, you know, it's a good story. The employers in this country aren't looking at the degree going, oh, you studied by distance or online. There is no evidence here to suggest that there's any suspicion of that. Where there is potentially suspicion, and this may be where some of the worry is around the everyone's getting into it, and who are the brands who are in this market that can potentially disrupt or taint the market that we currently have, which is already reasonably well quality assured. So I don't personally believe, and I'm sure there are many colleagues in the room that would support this as well, that that is a problem in Australia particularly. But there is always that opportunity. You know, there's the fake companies that are operating on our doorstep. You only have to go online and you can say, I want to do an online course, and up will come all these different companies with all the different things you can do, and they're all fake, and it's all about just getting the young people or unsuspecting people's money. So we have to be vigilant, I think, in the space.
Yeah, so I mean, I think you're right. I think Australia's got a sort of a good reputation in this area, and it's partly because of history. I think also the other side of the equation has got a little bit to it, in the sense, again, going back to learning design, is that people who move into online education, not like the big five that you mentioned in the early part of Australia's history in this area, people who move into online education but don't understand the need to change pedagogical approaches when moving from a more traditional environment into an online environment, frankly, put up courses that are about putting up PDFs on the web, or
it's an e-book.
Or it's an e-book, or it's an unmoderated discussion with the idea that the delivery mechanism is the same as the pedagogy. So I think you need to break down the student experience, the student learning processes and student learning outcomes. I couldn't agree with you more about the outcomes thing, but it does remind me of a colleague of mine who, not recently, but 10 years ago, studied a master's degree online in library studies. And I said to her, you know, how did that go? That's fantastic. She said she'd just finished. She said, fantastic, it went really well. I feel qualified for my next gig. It was at a university that's not our university. And then she reflected and she paused and she said, of course, I basically taught myself for 2 years. And that's the learning process and student experience thing that I think gives the online learning a bad reputation, that you sort of push people out online and you set them adrift and let them go. And again,
I think it's unfortunate that sort of we've you know moved from correspondence, individual, alone, you know, flicking through papers at your desk at home, then just got pushed online into PDFs, and that's the thing that people still think of as online. You know, there is face-to-face in online. If face-to-face means it's physical, then it's not.
That's the face and the face.
It's the face-to-face, but many online, good, well-designed, highly interactive, very engaging online experiences are face-to-face, because the technology actually allows that right now. Having spent that week in China, they have no hang-ups about online and offline. They call it online and offline. No hang-ups whatsoever like us, so they don't have that history. Very interactive, small classes, face-to-face, learning and connecting with their peers. It's awesome experiences from what I saw.
There's another question here which someone's asked about. Do we, that is it a different paradigm that's needed for online, or can it be covered by the current approach and standards? And I think I opened with those questions as well, because I think that's what we as a community are maybe asking here today. Do we need something different? We may need something a little more. So referring back to what you were just saying, Gregor, if we were thinking about the things that maybe matter more in that space, then we may want to enhance what we currently have so that we could demonstrate that students are getting the right support, that teachers have the right preparation in order to be able to teach and design in online learning environments.
Absolutely. And I'm no expert in this area and don't pour through the standards quite regularly, but as much as I should. But I do think that one of the things which is supporting your point, Belinda, is that they're probably crafted with a particular kind of teaching and learning experience in mind, about contact, about interaction, like you were saying, Ray, that maybe need to be tweaked in order to accommodate sort of different modes of delivery.
One of the things we've come across, I'll say, is that because it's newer, online has a higher burden of proof, if you will. But then what if we were to turn the mirror onto large lecture classes or to other types of modalities of face-to-face instruction, which we assume is the goal, or presume is the gold standard, but it is not held to the same standards in many cases as online education is. So there was a website called nosignificantdifference.com that tried to collect studies about the efficacy of online learning to try to get over this hurdle. And most of the studies, unfortunately, most were just anecdotal initially, but now there have been more controlled studies. And at least the US Department of Education did a study that said hybrid learning actually was the preferred mode because students wanted the opportunity to get together, but not regularly, but just to have the combination. But even fully online courses and curricula have proved to be very successful. Okay, we've unbundled qualifications, delivery, credentials, or well, I'll say we're in the process. Is it now time to unbundle universities?
I don't even know what that means. What does that mean?
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe the Learning and Teaching Centre is a private company. Maybe the quality unit is outsourced to somewhere. I don't know, maybe we sort of pull things apart.
Well, I'll tell you, in the US, that's a very ongoing question. Can you separate out, and governors are saying, separate out the research function. The fact that a new study just came out 3 or 4 days ago in the US, that contingent faculty or adjunct faculty are now the majority of faculty teaching the majority of courses, both in terms of numbers and credit hour generated. So in a sense, there's been an unbundling of the faculty function, and what should the full-time faculty be responsible for, and what is their role in relationship to the unbundling of the full-time model, which has been so characteristic of high-quality universities. We're also seeing outsourcing, places like Navitas, 2U, academic partnerships, where a tremendous amount of support services and career support are being provided by third parties with VC support. And then there are questions about who's actually running the VCs and the ROI expectations versus the faculty, and that's where governance becomes a very real issue. So it's something that's very live in the US, and a lot of money has been lost, I will say, in trying to build models. Fathom University, Columbia tried to do $150 million. Couldn't make it go.
No.
edX has yet to develop a profitable business model, but Harvard and MIT can afford it a little bit. But it is just to say this whole idea of unbundling, of moving outside the university, I think is something we will see more of.
Agreed.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's happened here. I mean, here there's plenty of service provision and support that supports a whole range of different universities across the sector, where the outsourcing of support in a range of different types of student services is happening already. I think the key at the heart, maybe at that unbundling of the university, is that relationship between research and teaching and learning in a traditional university structure. Numbers of people are on record, including my own Vice-Chancellor, sort of suggesting that part of the homogeneity about the Australian higher education system is that all universities are sort of born or cut from the same cloth from a policy and regulatory environment through history. And the status and culture of universities is inexorably tied to this idea of teaching and research cohabiting. Some of the literature, if you look at John Hattie's research, who's been arguing for many years that this is not the case, that there's no that you don't necessarily do better in terms of your learning outcomes in teaching-oriented institutions or if you're taught by researchers. But this is a complete anathema to many of our academic staff who would see it as intrinsic to the teaching and learning experience, and the idea of being associated with leading professors and cutting-edge science in whatever your discipline area is essential as an undergraduate education. So I think that there's quite a bit to play in that debate in this country as we look to the future.
There's probably two questions here, though, that are similar. Was one for you, Gregor, about workload, time and cost, and then that other issue around online delivery presented as requiring less resources.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, that one there. Sorry, the third one. Are Australian universities realistic about the workload, time and cost required to design, develop and deliver online education? Well, I suppose it depends on the university. So from our experience, I mean, I think that the phrasing of that, the response to that question would be, one of the things that I've argued for a long time, which may be changing, is that in order to do high quality online education, if you're an administrator of a university, don't look to that for savings if high quality is what you're wanting to do. It's something that is, when done well, it's commensurate in terms of cost from what would be regarded as traditional education. So I think that from our experience in setting up high quality online, there's an upfront cost that needs to be borne. But then once we have it going, and the data from our institution is that it's similar in cost in terms of delivery. I think that there are hidden costs associated with it which aren't always counted, which we have counted, but particularly on the academic staff time. And I think that at the heart, maybe of the question, which is now gone, so I can't look back at it, at the heart of that is that there is a setup cost which is often difficult for academic staff particularly to get their heads around a new design process and often a different pedagogy. And I think that that's often not counted for in providing high quality online education.
This top question here is an interesting one, and let me preface it by asking, is there a higher attrition rate in online? Are you experiencing that? And the question is, what do you see are the key factors impacting on retention and success for online students? But comparatively, what's your experience been here in Australia?
I think you can see from the public record that there is a higher attrition of distance students in particular and in online modalities. We're not alone on that at all. If you look anywhere around the world and look at the statistics, in fact, I think our statistics are better than what you see in the UK. I've recently come from working at the Open University, and so we should be very proud of our achievement. It's a really complicated question, and it deserves its own discussion. There are hygiene factors, and there are things that we can't control, and there are things that we can control. So for all of us here, we probably know what some of those things are. We can always do better. But a lot of the time, for me, when I think about it personally, it's about getting the right student into the right program with the right support so that they can be successful. But it's far more complex than that.
So I would say exactly I won't speak about the statistics, but what we refer to as a high-touch model in exactly the same way as you're talking about, Belinda. So we have a high-touch model in regards to getting the right student into the right course from the point of the inquiry to admitting them into the course, and have a dedicated sort of team associated with doing that, which is incredibly important to the student experience. But then once they're in the course, we maintain that. We've got quite low staff-student ratios. We maintain a sort of model where we have high touch. technical, administrative and pedagogical advice within the course, and we think that that is essential in building confidence in the student and also retaining the student. When combined with excellent learning design, we feel that that's the model that's working well.
I would agree with that, and so that's exactly the same criteria as is required for face-to-face learning as online. It's the same criteria. I mean, in online, I think people assume that there's no facilitator or teacher, you're on your own doing it like a distance program. I think still teachers are the killer app in online. It's very important to have close relationship with the academic staff and with other students, whatever mode of delivery that occurs in.
Which is why we, I think, see our student satisfaction scores and retention as high, if not higher, than commensurate side-by-side face-to-face classes.
Before you finish up, Ralph, I'm going to add a couple of questions of my own.
Sure. Crikey.
From the perspective of private providers who don't necessarily have access to large IT infrastructure support like other higher education providers might, I think the minimal computing movement in America that's influencing teaching and learning strategy in a really, really interesting way might have something to offer. And I guess when we go to online, we pretty much almost straight away think about computers, and we're not thinking about things like voice over internet protocol. Teleclasses are a part of online education that we don't very often talk about, but for private providers, they can be a really successful strategy for engaging with students. So I wonder if you have any thoughts around minimal computing, around rethinking some of the infrastructure burden that online provides to education in this country and others. And I'm thinking also here about places in the world where computing facilities aren't as prevalent.
You, me?
You go first.
Listen, I think it's a really pressing question. I think it's particularly with access and equity, I think that these are really important questions. So my thing is, and not to be at all dismissive of the minimal computing movement, but I don't really think about the technology. What I think about is who the audience is, where they are, and what their capabilities to engage. And if that's through if it's a mobile device in parts of Africa, then we design situations that enable that device to support education. And there's plenty of things that you can do, and as a learning designer of 20 years, there's plenty of things that you can do with low fidelity and low tech stuff that doesn't require high-end kit. And if you can actually design for low-end kit, it's often cheaper, and the educational experience, because the educational design drives it, the educational experience is better. So I'm all for it.
Any other thoughts on that one?
Well, I think before I said around the for TEXA in particular, if they were strengthening any of the standards in any way around the infrastructures piece, you might strengthen that area around the technology piece to reflect the changes, and that would make the standards more fit for purpose for the environment that we're currently operating in. But like Gregor, I don't think I would necessarily support a minimum computing standards which would box people into a way of having to think and work. When I think about, Lesotho and, the people who learn there on their phone and they charge their phone by the battery on the bike that comes up the hill once a month or week, it would be disadvantageous. In fact, it would leave people out if we started to go down a track like that.
Oh, I would have to disagree with that. I think the interesting thing about minimal computing standards is they lend themselves to notions like graceful degradation, which are ways of designing for futures that are as yet unknown. And so you actually lend what you're doing greater modularity and flexibility going forward into a future of technology competencies and standards that we may not be able to predict.
Okay, I might misunderstand what you're saying.
I would agree. I think we could look to developing countries for the ways in which they are tackling these problems, because they haven't got the legacy systems and infrastructure that we have and we hold on to and we design around. And they, for example, a startup, or I guess it's a couple of years old now, K-12 startup in Indonesia has now got 10 million students on the platform. All it is, it's just mobile only on sort of iPad or a sort of phone device. Huge impact into the education system there. Very minimal technology required, nothing to do in the classroom, no technology infrastructure required in the classroom at all. So I think we could look to those other developing countries who've just leapfrogged, essentially, the technology infrastructure issue.
Yeah, it reminds me, I built my first learning management system 20 years ago when we didn't have legacy standards. And it was a very exciting time to do that. It's not now. It's a one-size-fits-all kind of depressing environment.
It is
some ways.
in developed countries.
It is though, yeah. So I have one last question before we break for lunch. Sorry about this, everyone. You're going to have to starve a little bit longer. Given our reliance, I think, moving into a future of on the online standards and regulatory mechanisms, does this sector have some kind of responsibility to also think about the standards that are delivered through government legislation around online provision, such as net neutrality or internet privacy and things like this? Because I think these are the things that will really impact us moving forwards.
I think it's a good question. I'm not going to get into whose responsibility it is, but I think that one of the things that we actively think about is accessibility, and that's in a range of things. But one of the things like net neutrality, I think, is a good one in terms of data accessibility, because we are so reliant in the way in which we design things, even in campus-based learning that uses a learning management system. We are asking our students to rely on technology to do a lot of things which we now think of as mundane, but require a level of access in terms of data, which is sometimes quite tricky and quite difficult. So whether or not I think the sector certainly has a responsibility through, I know that Ascolite's got some things and ACODA's got some things, and there's standards that can inform what Texas might do in this area. Whether that pushes into issues like net neutrality, I think is an open question for me.
I agree. I think it's a yes to your question, all of that. Again, I don't know where the accountability sits for some of it, but certainly TEXA can play a role in sort of saying, well, this is what the expectation needs to be. I think I worry quite a lot about the data side of it, and although we ask our students permission and we use your data and etc., they are increasingly having more data of their data in the system. And so, that part of my story where, my stuff was on the blockchain and now everybody has my identity. That's not far from the truth, actually. And so it's important that we worry about it so that we get it right.
I mean, I think that area, sorry not to prolong people, sorry about the lunch people, but I think that that issue of data and, with the rise of learning analytics and academic analytics, and I think that there is a responsibility, and maybe TEXA has a role in looking at privacy and ethics and associated with data collection. I think that this is something that as a sector we're doing a lot, and there are pockets of people doing fantastic things in the area of learning and academic analytics. And I think sometimes we are in danger of not really taking serious account for the ethics and privacy issues. I think this is an area that we probably do need to clean up as a sector in the next 18 months.
Anything else? Nope. Lunch, plenty to chew on. Please thank the panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.